Hi, today at the Shamrock Quilt Studio we're working on our modern Dresden project. Here's a little sneak preview. So let's get right to it. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Hi there, so glad you could join us again. Today we're working on our modern Dresden project, and if you see, we have 2 blocks that are complete. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that today. What I decided to do, and wouldn't you know, there it is, it's hiding from me. What we decided to do is alternate the plates and the background and the centers into the circle. So I wanted first to talk to you about that circle. I did it 2 ways because I wanted to figure out which one worked best and gave me the best results. The first one I sewed around the circle by hand. And the second one, which is this type here, I sewed by machine. Now, I personally found that sewing by hand worked better. It was just as fast and it seemed to work better because I just had the one thread to deal with. But if you are sewing by hand, what you want to do is you want to find the middle of the fabric and you want to find the middle of your template. And you're going to poke a pin through both so you hold them in place. And that's going to be important to be able to make sure right now that you get it gathered properly to get a perfect circle, and also later to put it into position in the right place. Okay, so this one is sewn by machine, and I have taken the white thread here and tied the 2 ends into a knot. And then I had the 2 black threads, which I'm pretty sure was the bobbin thread, and they are loose. And I'm going to pull them in the direction they were sewn. So in other words, in opposite directions from each other. We're going to stick that pin right there just so it holds the whole thing in place. Maybe. There, that should work. And then we're going to pull it. And as we pull it, it's going to gather up. And that's not working really well. And that's the problem that I found in doing this, is I found it to be more difficult with the machine stitched in doing it in a circle. If you were gathering a straight line of fabric, I think you'd find it much easier and much more effective to do it with machine. I know from my early days of sewing that was the situation, because ruffles and gathers were very much in vogue then. So we were able to do it. We're just going to push those little gathers all around, and I'm going to have to pull one side at the time and kind of, you know what it is? I think it's that one side doesn't want to pull. So we'll just go with the other. Okay, now you're beginning to see where it's forming that circle. Let me give you a nice close-up. Pull that out now. We'll see that we've got a circle. And then from that point, because we used a heat-proof mylar with our template for the center, we can press right on it and get a nice, firm, flat circle that we can put in the middle of our plate. Now, this is the 3-inch circle from the template set. So I did not make any adjustments. If you wanted to, and you had the appropriate fabric here, you could use a really small circle here. Or you could use something that was much, excuse me, much larger than the 3-inch we have, so that you had a huge center with just little small blades. If you were looking for something that looked a little bit more like a sunflower, that's what I would recommend that you do. But the traditional Dresden, that would be the size. And from here, how do you find out where to put it? Well, remember I said we had that pinhole in the middle. So we're going to stick that pin right back through that pinhole. And then we're going to look at our square. And remember, we pressed diagonally. We should be able to find that pinhole right there. And then we're going to take the center of this. It's already got the pin in it. And we're going to put that pin. It's a little harder to do things when they're not right in front of you. Right in the center. And then once we line that up, that would be where it goes. Now once it's pressed and cooled, you can take the template material out of here. Just remember to keep your pen in at that point so you know where to put it. And then once it's out of the template and it's firmly folded in place, then you would pin it around to hold it into place while you stitch it. And I don't know if we've covered this enough or not. The way I'm doing this particular project is I'm hand stitching like an applique stitch to secure the blades or the plate onto the background. And then I did the same thing for the circle. You don't have to do that. You could do it with my machine if that's more comfortable for you. You could even use a some type of adhesive to attach it on to the fabric if you wanted to. Totally up to you. And then I wanted to share one other thing that I thought of. You know, this particular design that we're using, the background fabric is very important, but it's not necessarily important over the whole back. And if you wanted to be economical with your fabric, you could come back here and cut on the inside of your stitch line so that you could use that fabric for another project. Or if you wanted this to be particularly lightweight, you could do that. I would just recommend that you do that before you sew on the center. And then once you get it on, that you somehow make sure that those loose pieces here in the middle, because remember they're not secured here until you secure them. So if you cut the back off, then you want to make sure that they stay where they need to be. So I would recommend, if you do that, to be ready to go ahead and put this on as soon as you cut that back off. I think that will help you. Alternatively, if you're really good at hand stitching, you could sew the circle on and only sew it through the black and white fabric and then cut it off. Totally up to you. Totally optional. Couple of ideas there. Okay, so this isn't sewn on yet, but we're gonna proceed as if it were, because I wanted to show you our next step in this project. Let me just tidy up some of these bits and pieces here. Oh, and I will tell you that for sewing the plates onto the background, I just used a black thread. I think you could also use a gray thread. That medium gray seems to just kind of blend into everything. You could use that as well. I found the white to be too stark because this fabric is a white background, but it has black in it, that it tends to blend pretty well as long as you keep your stitches very small and you try to keep them as invisible as possible. So let me clear off my work area here a little bit. And our next step is going to be hooking these blocks together. And we'll start with these two. And this is going to be really simple. It's not going to be anything that probably you haven't done many, many times before. But we're just going to put a simple 1/4 inch stitch to join these two. And I'm just going to quickly do that. We want to make sure that the corners are lined up If you have a big discrepancy in your sizes, you may want to check to see if you don't need to trim those again. And also I would, if you do have that large discrepancy, you may want to go back and fold the fabric in half so that this blade in the middle, you figure out where that is so that you know you're kind of in line from one to the other. You don't want one plate on one square to really be higher than the other. But they're not sitting super close to each other, so unless it's a big discrepancy, you're probably not going to notice it. Now I have changed to, I was using white on the top and black on the bottom because I was working on our borders. Now I have changed it to both white. I think the black may show up when we sew it. Ideally, you could go and have the blue and the green top and bottom. I just really didn't think it was that big a deal for this. If you were doing a full-size quilt and you had a bunch of pieces to put together, it might be worth the effort. And with these, we are going to tack in the ends. So we're going to take a couple of stitches and then we took a couple of stitches back. I'm using my 1/4 inch foot again. That has become the #1 favorite foot for my machine this year and last year. I'm making sure both pieces are lined up together. And I'm using a 2.4 stitch, which I think is a little longer than the default on my machine. I think my default is 1.8. And I've got a little bit of play here. And what I'm doing is I'm just smoothing that fabric out right before it goes under the foot, so one piece doesn't get bigger than the other. Now I didn't back up, but I'm already off the fabric, so we're just gonna keep moving. Okay, so we've got a nice line of stitches right there. Little finger press. I'll tell you something else I've noticed while we're kind of working on this. This green and the blue is a motif fabric, and I didn't really notice a lot of difference in the, I don't want to say quality, but the actual weight of the fabric when comparing it to something like this, because when you just do this and you feel them, you don't really feel that much difference. However, I will say that once I got these cut, there is more body in these blue and green fabrics from Moda than there are in the others. And they were pre-washed, so I don't think that's it. It may just be that the cotton used in that had a little firmer texture. It's almost a little rougher too. I don't know if that's just my imagination or if it really is. Okay, we're going to do this one. And no special worries about which one's on top or which seam you're working on because they're going to alternate. So if they don't fit right here, they'll fit right here. Okay. And it looks like that green stretched just a little bit more than the blue, but very inconsequential. We're going to do the same thing here. It's a little funny noise from my machine. I thought it was going to do a bird's nest on me, but it is not. We're moving along. I just want to try to keep those seams even. And let me tell you, I think that got a little narrow. So I'm going to take that out real quick. I'm just going to clip this out and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Just quickly what I did. It looked like the seam there on the edge was not pushed all the way up to that guide on the right hand side. So I cut the thread and took it out and took about 2 inches out where it looked like it had come off the seam line. You want to make sure that you do keep a pretty good even seam along the edge, because if you don't, that square is going to get a little wonky and it may not be noticeable until you get the whole thing done, and then you'll really notice it. So precision is important, and to be honest with you, sometimes it's a little hard to keep track of the seam line here and make sure I'm talking to you and giving you the information that you need. Okay. I will say too that the motif fabric, I don't know if it's just because it's such a bright color and it's very obvious, but it does seem like it ravels a little bit more. I don't know what that is. And I've noticed that with something else I did with Mono one time. Okay. All right, so let's move this out the way a bit and see what we have here. We have the 4 squares sewn together and we've paired them up. So now we want to hook them up with 4. So we're going to flip-flop this one. And now we've got the 4 in the design we want. And if I were not filming, I would go ahead and press these seams open. And let me tell you something about that, because sometimes we press seams open and sometimes we press to the side. It's much easier to press it to the side because you've only got one side of fabric to deal with. But I find that if you're going to get a accurate seam allowance and therefore your pieces are going to be accurate, you're going to have to press them open. So instead of running to the ironing board rather, we're just going to press those open by fingers, and then I did the wrong side. We'll do this one. And then we'll press them together. So what I'm doing is, instead of pressing, is I'm just pinning those seams open so I can pin it in place. I've got a little piece of fabric there. Okay, so right sides together. We've got the design we want. And then we're going to sew. And we're going to start there in the middle because that's where it's going to be critical that it matches up. I'm going to pin there. And then we're going to pin at the outside. Okay, there we've got that first half pinned in place, and I've got to pin about every 3 inches, I would say. Okay, we've got it pinned all the way to here, and then we've got 2 down there. So we're going to sew this, and we're going to check it one more time to make sure we've got the design we want. And that seam in the middle is perfectly matched. So keeping our fingers crossed, it'll come out and be exactly what we want it to be. And we are going to tack this at the end because we don't want it coming out. If for some reason we need to take it out, we can always cut it. Taking our pins out as we go. And we're keeping that fabric lined up. Whoops, pin came out somewhere. I'm just checking here on the back to make sure everything's in place. It looks good. Using my scissors as a little stiletto just to make sure that everything is smooth going in. Taking out some more pins. There we go. All right, we're doing well, I think. It looks good. We're almost there. A little back stitch. And check our pins are all out. We got one back here. Perfect match. Love it there how it comes together. Now once we get those seams pressed, that will really lay down flat for us. Look at that. Isn't that pretty? I think that's exactly what I was looking for. Something with that traditional pattern, but something very modern. We just need to get that circle on that one down there and put us a border on it, and we can hang it up on the wall. Now, let me grab my pieces of border that I'm working on because I want to cover that a little bit. The border is really easy, but it does involve a lot of pieces of fabric, and we want to talk a little bit about things to watch out for as you're putting your strips of border together. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back, and I'm so excited. I wanted to first of all check and see how spot on we are with our measurements. Now, we wanted this to be a finished 25-inch square. So I've got a 24-inch ruler, and then I'm going to use this one to just measure where we are. We are spot on. We're at 25½ inches. So when we put a 1/4 inch on one end for each seams, we should be right at that 25 inches. And why is that important? Because the border we've chosen to go with this is a checkerboard, and each of these squares finishes up at 1 inch. Hold on just a second, I've got a couple of pins in here that I must have missed. So here are the strips, and I think we've got, those are exactly the same. One of these should be, yeah, this is the one that's just a little bit longer. These are 24-inch strips. This is a 25-inch strip. So you can see that if we give that just a little bit of a stretch, that's going to cover that just perfectly. It probably needs to be ironed and stretched just a tad. So a lot of little seams in there, and if you're off just a little bit in every seam, it can really draw it up. But we're going to give it another press, and when we press it, we're going to pull it just slightly, and that should be that. Okay, so this one's 25. We're going to put on a top and a bottom, and it's a square, so it doesn't matter which one. We're going to make two 25-inch pieces. So I've got a 24 here. I need to add one more block at the end to get this 25. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew this one on and that one on. And then when we come to the other side, what are we going to need? We're going to need a 25, 26, 27, 28, 29-inch strip. So I've got one more piece to sew on and some pressing, and I can do these two. And then I've got a 24-inch. So I need to add 3 more on this, and then I need to make another strip. I thought it was close when I cut all these pieces, but I think even I mentioned it then that I didn't think I had everything. And that is a little time consuming. And I want to make sure that when I cut the additional strips that I need, that I don't overcut, because it's a lot of sewing and you don't want to sew more than you need. If you sew 2 or 3 more, that's fine, but you don't want to have a bucket full of little 1.5-inch squares. So we want to keep that pretty tight into what we need. So we've gotten a lot done today, I think. We've really gone from 4 individual pieces to 1 full piece of this. So next time when we come in, depending on how much I get done of this border, we'll definitely be able to put the 2 ends on. And I don't know, I'm going to try to get enough done that we can go ahead and put all of that on. And then all that will be left is sandwiching it and doing the quilting and then putting the binding. I think for this one, I was thinking I would machine quilt this because it's a small project, and small projects really do well on the machine to machine quilt it. But what I noticed when we made the little blades with the rounded ends, it's really hard on a domestic machine to make that curve just very smooth and equal around your fabric. So if I did it on the machine, it would have to be all straight lines, and I don't know if I like that or not. I was thinking maybe more of an echo quilt, but let me think on that a little bit before next week, and we'll decide. But we should be able to wrap up the top of this quilt in our next video, and then move on to quilting in some manner, and decide at that point where we want to go. And we'll put these borders on and sandwich it and quilt it and put a binding, and we'll be done. So we're about 1-2 videos out from finishing this, I think. I hope you've enjoyed it today. It's a little something different. This is a very different look from anything I've done. I'm pretty excited about it, and I think it's coming together really nicely. Be sure to like the video if you've learned something, share it with a friend, and subscribe to our channels, because we're trying to grow the channel so we can do more in the world of quilting to share with you. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time at the Shamrock Quilt Studio.